With me on the phone is Michael Jacobson, musician and author. Michael, thanks for being on the show.
Tim, it's a pleasure to be on your air today.
Well, first off, just, tell the audience who is Michael Jacobson?
Well, Michael Jacobson is a journeyman guitar player, band leader who's been slugging around his Stratocaster since the 80s, playing with over 100 Billboard charting groups, everybody from the doo-wop era to the 60s and 70s and some 80s artists. I've been on tour with Marc and the Vandellas and the Drifters and the Platters and Little Anthony and the Imperials, Darlene Love, Cowsills, Gary Puckett. So I'm a guitar player. I'm a veteran, and I've seen a lot of crazy things in my tours and travels.
I bet. Well, and you've got a book out right now called Mock and Roll.
Rock and roll. Yeah, when I got started in the 80s, most of the first groups I worked with were some of the black acts from the 50s and 60s, the Platters, the Drifters, the Shirelles. And when I started, every one of those groups was made up of an original person from the original group, and then some younger people that they added as time and attrition caused the group to change. And then somewhere after a few years, some of the original people began to retire or pass or whatever. And the groups continued without the original members. And it was much to the surprise of many of us that the audience didn't seem to notice or care. And then, of course, once that happened, the people who run these groups noticed they didn't have to pay the real people. They could just put out anybody who fit into the tuxedo or the miniskirt. And things got a little weird with who was really performing. Now, I'm not here to be preachy about what's good and what's bad. And if you go to the State Fair and you see four younger guys singing older music and they're great, terrific. But if you're going to pay, $100 to get a ticket to go to your local theater to see 4 or 5 of these groups and none of them are real, well, then you're going to probably be a little upset. So me and the guys, after seeing the people doing crazy things, we started to joke around about it, like, how far out could people take this? And then, you know what? I decided to write a book, a comedy about how crazy it could get if people really just completely disregarded all the rules, all the legalities, and just pretended and did whatever the heck they wanted.
Okay, well, I was gonna. What? So this is fiction based on reality.
Very much so.
Okay, all right. So kind of give us a brief overview of the book. I mean, you kind of have, but
Well, the book really is a comedy. It is fiction. The book opens with this band of guys who are on their last hope. 4 guys who are actually playing in a rest home when we meet them. And, the audience has got on slippers and gurneys and tubes running in and out of them. And they're on their last legs. And they get a call from a very coarse, very irritating agent in New York who, after much insulting, gives them a gig playing behind what they think is an original Motown act. But after a long car trip, they get to the gig, and then they find out it's not an original Motown act, but they're getting paid better than they were before. So they end up pretty much getting mixed up with people who are sending out people based on trademark or some other workaround to get around the law and the legalities that you're going to see. And this isn't just oldies. This happens in country, and this happens in all sorts of music. And so the guys, there was a time in the 90s, getting back to the reality of it, there was a time in the 90s when all these tabloid TV stations were doing stories about rock and roll's dirty little secret, doing this exact thing.
Uh-huh.
Guy Bowser from the Sha Na Na group had a crusade going about truth in rock and roll. But the bottom line is, after many TV shows, some which were like on ABC TV in prime time, the public didn't really seem to care. And a lot of these people were more emboldened to do even more crazy things. So the book basically follows this band as they get deeper and deeper into the sausage making, if you will, and begin to realize that if you're going to rob the bank, take all the money. If you're going to pretend to be somebody, pretend to be somebody big.
If you're going to do it, go big is what they say, I guess.
Go big, So these guys went through different periods where they pretended to be different people. At one point, they pretended to be British. And of course, when you're British and you're pretending and you're not very good at the offstage part of that pretending, what's the first thing that happens to you? You end up in a radio studio being interviewed. And we have a very, very funny moment with a man not that different from you, looking at these four guys like they're insane because they're British, but they're not. It's very... And of course, we take it all the way out. One of the guys is finally pretending to be a woman in one of their final moments. And of course, for all of this, they think that pretty much nobody is noticing. But through it all, there are people who notice, and there are people who represent what I like to jokingly call the oldies police.
Yeah.
And they get caught up with it in the end. But they're a little bit too sympathetic and too charming a bunch to get in too much trouble over and stuff like that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, your British thing reminded me of, Carrie Fisher slipping in and out of a British accent in Star Wars, so.
Yeah, well, Madonna does that now in real life.
Yeah, she came to mind too. And, I guess, you talk about the oldies police, and you know what, I'm going to count myself among that bunch because, it irritates me. Well, something that's kind of got my goat for decades is, I think the first taste I got was when I'd go out to buy a tape or a CD and, find out when I got it home that the songs had been re-recorded, according to the package by the original artist, but, still irritated me though. I wanted the original stuff.
There's a lot of that going around. I lived in Europe for a couple of years and I'm listening to this oldies radio station, and I'm noticing that the songs just don't seem quite right.
Yeah.
And I talked to a friend of mine over there, and apparently the royalties for playing real music on the radio are so high there that there's a big industry of people who produce knockoffs. So, in a lot of funny ways, the reason we have mock and rollers is because there's a Walmart kind of mentality to America right now. We want to hire for less. We want to put on a great show, but we don't want to pay that much, or we don't want the tickets to be expensive. And that creates opportunities for those who would take advantage.
Yeah. And, we are an oldie station, and so if it's not the original thing, then, we don't play it until we can find the original hit. And I've heard other stations that play oldies, I say oldies, those knockoffs or re-recordings of them, and I'm like, that's not the original thing. We shouldn't even be hearing that.
No, there's really no place for it. And it really doesn't, in America, it really makes no difference. You're paying your royalties to the various agencies based on a whole thing. So, trying to skirt, I guess it was different in Europe, but in this country, it's the real abuse is really in the live performance. It's at those little county fairs, where you just see four guys in tuxedos or three girls in miniskirts, and they sound great. If you're phony, you better be really good.
Yeah. And
that's the hard part for the audience, I think.
Yeah. And, I don't know if you've seen these on public TV whenever they start, pledging, getting your pledges and all that, you start seeing they'll have the doo-wop specials or the groups, and, good and well, a lot of the members weren't even born when the songs were hits.
Well, you know what? I'm not a big fan of P.J. Levinsky and all of his shows. I've been on a couple of them, Max. I was on most recently with Frank Hyman's Teenagers.
Yeah.
Those shows aren't what they appear to be. They come off as this wonderful hour. But the fact is those shows are usually recorded over 3 or 4 days. And most of those acts aren't even on the same day. I'm always surprised at the audience shots because some of these audience shots might be 10 years ago. They just put in anything they want. It's crazy.
Well, and I was going to ask you somewhere along the way, and you've already, let us know that the audience doesn't seem to care. And that's what it looks like in some of these camera shots. These old folks are just dancing in the aisles and just having a big time.
Well, it's something that I think we all know, whether we admit it to ourselves or not as artists. But I remember my very first gig with Herb Reed and the Platt. We opened the show with Twilight Time, and the place goes bananas. Herb Reed goes up to the singer, "Oh, man, they like you, and the place is going nuts. Oh, wait a minute, they like the song." And that is the greatest truism of oldies. People love the music and don't really always understand where it came from or who it was that sang it to them. Today, you download some music, you don't get liner notes, you don't get a picture of the act. Used to be when you and I were buying these records in the first place, you got them on an album.
Yeah.
There was a group, and you had liner notes explaining where these guys came from and all of that. We have lost a lot in the elimination of vinyl. CDs were okay, but really they didn't even compare. And, I miss my liner notes. I miss my pictures of the artists. I miss that stuff greatly.
Yeah. And I've got my music on my phone now. I use that as my MP3 player, but I like to have the album art at least, whenever it pops up. So it's close to at least having the album there to look at.
It also informed a lot. You really, I don't blame people for not understanding who they're looking at singing because they're not getting that information anymore.
Yeah.
It's funny. We're in a world where there's so much information everywhere you look. But if you look up oldies, what do you find? You find people fighting over things. You go on Facebook, the Crests are fighting over the original and the phony and all of this crap. Dupree's, all it, and it's like, after a while, I think the average fan says, the heck with it. I'll turn on the radio and I'll enjoy it, but I'm not going to spend money for tickets for this kind of craziness.
Yeah.
And in the end, it's going to be guys like PBS and the state fairs is all that's going to be left. It's funny, I used to play with Herbie and the Platters, as I mentioned. It was my first group. I was with him for many years. We went all over the world. And he passed away a few years, and there's a guy running his group. And so the group is now Herb Reed's Platters. And the guy who's running the group, okay, you're a legacy group. Well, within a few months, all of the people who sang with Herb left the group. So nobody in the group even knew Herb Reed anymore. And then this guy, with the gall of a thief, I couldn't believe it, he's now got a group that he calls Tribute to the Platters. So he's got a group that to me is nothing more than a tribute. Then he's got something below that he calls a tribute. But to me, it's like I've got a cheap act for everybody who needs a cheap act. And all I need is 4 tuxedos and 4 guys who could fit into them. Yeah. And it's like, wow, I can't believe it. I just can't believe it, doesn't it? Just, but it means a lot to me. The music means a lot to you. And the people who listen to it, I tell you, every one of them should enjoy it when they can enjoy it. But don't pay for it unless you know you got the real thing.
Yeah. Well, now, my favorite group of all time is the Beach Boys. Well, see, now you've got, Carl and Dennis have died. You've got Mike Love out there touring as the Beach Boys with Bruce Johnston, who, in the early days was a member, too.
And then you got Brian Wilson out there doing his thing.
Yeah, Brian Wilson and Al Jardine are out there doing their own things, too. So, but at least they're not trying to, they're all singing Beach Boys songs, but, at least they're not trying to all go under the Beach Boys.
Let me tell you, I've been on a bill with the Beach Boys a number of times, and many people who know the Beach Boys for many years. And when you go see Brian Wilson, I actually caught the tour he was doing with Jeff Beck. And one thing I'll say about Brian Wilson, he gets out there with a full stage full of musicians, and they do what they can do.
Yeah. Well, it does seem like that, the group Brian Wilson has in his bunch, I mean, they're all... They're purists, I guess, because they'll take the pains to make it sound like the record, whether it's Good Vibrations or some of the other more intricate stuff that's, more involved than just their early garage band type sound,
I tell you, who I've been working with some lately that blows me away how great they sound is Cowsills. The 3 remaining siblings, they sing harmony like angels. It's unbelievable.
Well, yeah. Now, John, he tours with the Beach Boys too. So.
Well, yeah, the drummer is their younger brother.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and I'd seen where Susan was out sometimes, but I didn't know, how involved of a tour it was.
She does the golf. She's in New Orleans, so she does the golf on her own little blues band. But they get together as the Cowsills. They're out on the Happy Together tour again this year.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And they're just terrific. Oldies fans. Happy Together is like the Good Housekeeping seal of an oldie show. You go see that, you get the Turtles, you get Gary Puckett, you get the Cowsills, and 2 or 3 others, and they're all guaranteed to be the real deal and in real good shape.
All right, well, now, back to some of these other, you talking about the tribute groups, and I think at one time there were maybe 2 or 3 different Drifters groups out there.
I'll tell you right now, I was on a New Year's Eve in New York City with the Drifters group, and I was told there were 9 groups out that night. running the Drifters at the time had. The 4 guys I had with me, and I've done hundreds of Drifter shows. I had never seen any of these guys anywhere before or ever since. It was like New Year's Eve. Get all the guys who can sing a note together, put them out as the Drifters, make sure they know 3 or 4 of the songs, and send an experienced band to cover their plot. That's what my job was, you know.
Wow.
And I ended up actually quitting that scene over that because it got to be too much, you know. I don't mind going to do a corporate date, you know, with 3 girls who can sing, but they're not really the Marvelettes. But don't send me to a concert for the public like that. You know, that's not right.
Yeah, yeah.
Corporate people, they're going to just ignore you anyway. And since those dates pay so well, who am I to turn them down? You know?
Yeah. Well, and you know, I too was going to ask you, what your take on all this was, but you said you weren't really here to judge anybody. Well, I'm not important enough to judge anybody. I think, I could go out there and I could preach along with Bowser about the truth in rock and roll, but I don't think I can have that impact. I think as a writer, I might be able to have a little more of an impact because the people will pick up my book and for the entertainment value and then get a little bit of the story down. Well, that's nice. I also write a series of thrillers too, so I generally write for entertainment. I'm not trying to save the world. There's enough people out there making that mistake. Okay, well, I was going to ask you if this was the only book you've written. What else have you got out there?
Well, you know what? I started a few years ago writing memoir kind of material about the crazy stories on the road. And some people read them and they liked them, but they said, who are you? Who would care? And they suggested I turn them into fiction. So the 2 books I've published so far is The Rock and Roll, which is a comedy. The other book is called Twilight Time, The Rock and Roll Adventures of Mickey Jake. And this character, Mickey Jake, I like to think of him as like a Mickey Spillane in music. He's a musician. He does his trade by night when all sorts of things happen. And is Mickey the next victim or is he the next suspect? Kind of stories. So the first book is called Twilight Time, and he gets some of the people in his band get involved with drug dealers, and people start getting murdered, and either Mickey's next or he's the criminal. You don't really find out until late. And then there's another one coming out this year called Don't Mess with Bill, and this book really focuses more on stalking, and but it all takes place in the rock and roll environment. And it all takes place with all sorts of true stories about real rock and roll guys and I keep the real names in there, guys for real, no need to change their name. And, I really enjoy this challenge myself to see how far out I can take something. And I'd like to think that the readers would enjoy that too. And by the way, if you want to find my books, you search Amazon, you use my middle name, Marc Jacobson, Marc with a C, and it'll take you right to my stuff. And this fall, I think I'm going to have a little clearance sale. I usually sell my Kindle editions for only 99 cents. Wish you could sell paperbacks that cheap, but that's not possible. And, it's a fun world out there. I wish more people would read because it really is. It's really kind of going away. I may have to make a movie out of one of these books just to get anyone to watch.
Yeah. And, I figured you being out there for so many years and being involved with so many different artists, you had a lot of stories to tell. And so I figured, well, that would make a good book, but you've already kind of been that route. But I guess you're still able to get those stories out under the guise of this mock and roll book. I mean, the stories are still out there, just, the names have been changed to protect the innocent, I guess. Yeah,
well, mock and roll, we've changed a lot of names. There's some real names. When we pretend to be the Vogues, we call it the Vogues. And that's because of a particular turn in the story. It had to be the Vogues because they were the ones that ABC TV connected us with on one of those true story shows. But, when I write the fiction and think about crime, and, it doesn't take much. The world is filled with crazy things going on. And, it's just nothing. There's nothing new under the sun. It's just new combinations of things.
Yeah.
And the writing is a very cathartic process, and it's, unfortunately, I don't work nearly as much as I used to. I like to think if I'm doing only 25 or 30 shows a year, that's the best 20 or 30 that I used to have out of 200. But get a lot of time to write these stories, and it really is nice to go back in time and relive these moments.
So okay, so your book is on Amazon. You have a website that folks can go to?
The author site on Amazon. So if you just do a search under Michael Marc Jacobson, you'll come to my author page, and that has all of my history on it. It has pictures of me with all these rock stars and all that kind of fun stuff.
Oh, okay.
Also, I'm on Facebook. If you want to look for me, just Michael Jacobson on Facebook, and a lot of pictures and videos posted there. Most recent show we just did with Gary Puckett has some pictures up there.
And that's Jacobson with an S-O-N and not an S-E-N.
That's correct. I would be amiss if I didn't mention one of my favorite gigs of all time happened down your way. I went to play with Herbie and the Platters in 1985 to the Alabama State Fair. I believe it was in Birmingham.
Uh-huh.
And we get to this fair, this in front of this bleachers, and there's 25,000 people there. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, a good oldie show is 5,000 people. I mean, that's a great oldie show. So 25,000 people in Birmingham in front of us. We do a show, it was great, and then what happens? The real show comes on. It turns out we were warming up Joey Chitwood's real show. And that's what the 25,000 people were there to see. But it's polite to us.
Well,
probably also the best barbecue I ever ate in my life.
Now, there you go. There you go. You can get some down here. Now, you played with Percy Sledge, too, is what I understand, too. Now, I used to sing in a group. Well, I sang for 20 years with this group called the Flashbacks. We sang oldies. Of course, we didn't present ourselves to be, any famous actor or anything. But now we sang over in Florence at the Alabama Theater before Percy. And this has been, good grief, this has been probably about 20 years ago now. So were you playing with him then?
No, I did a tour with him through New England, so I'm sure I wasn't down that far.
Oh, okay. I don't remember how many guys showed up, but when I saw he was on your list of folks, I thought, well, he may have been in the band, at that time. But
you know what? It's surprising. I was on the air with Jim Riggleman, I think is his name, in San Francisco, and he's telling me about a Darlene Love show that he saw, and he was describing a show that I first done about 2 years before. And it's always fun when I can say, yes, that was me, yes. But the fact is, there's so many musicians who do what I do.
Yeah.
And most of us are regionalized, If somebody's touring nationally, well, then they'll pick up a band to do all of it. But a lot of times, these tours are really kind of fragmented. It's a couple of weeks in New England, and then they're off, and then they go to the coast or something. So my specialty was grabbing those 2 weeks when they were within 500 miles of me.
Yeah. And I know a lot of these artists will just get a group of folks from the town that they're going to be in, and they just show up. And come to think of it, that might have been what Percy did whenever he came, because it was, over here in the shoals, around Muscle Shoals and all that. So, he may have just rounded up some musicians from there. Of course, he's from that area anyway, or was. And then,
you'd be surprised. A lot of groups, the band is really just one guy who brings in the other 3 or 4 guys when they get to a location. I used to do that for the Drifters back in the early 90s, and it was interesting having to find musicians. It would have been great to have Facebook back then, because all these doo-wop groups have all these, postings.
Yeah.
I had to call like the local union hall or a music store and see if anybody knew anybody who knew anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you can find a great drummer, and sometimes you merely found a guy who owned a set of drums.
Yeah.
So it's kind of sad when that happens.
Yeah. Oh, well. Well, okay, so we can go to Amazon and find your books. Thanks for coming on, and good luck with it.
Tim, you know what? Oldies lives in New Jersey and Florida and in parts of California. Where you are, we need all the help we can get, and I appreciate what you do, because keeping the oldies alive is important to everybody, because it's beautiful music.
Yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you for having me on, Tim.